Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show on this Wednesday, June 16th, 2021. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan coming to you from the National Weather Service. And as always, if you'd like additional weather information, you can go to weather.gov/Alaska or call 1-800-472-0391 for a recorded forecast. And if you have anything interesting to pass along, you can contact me at peter.chan@noaa.gov. Well, we're going to move right along and take a look at fire danger, because it's that time of year. We're into the fire weather season, and we do have high to a few pockets of extreme fire danger showing up now across especially central and east central parts of the state along the Yukon River and up through the Yukon Flats along the Porcupine River, where there's quite a bit of just the dryness that's been in place and where the fuels are at this point. Plus we have a few isolated thunderstorms in that region, so a cloud-to-ground lightning strike could start a fire, as most wildfires are started by lightning. There is also a pocket in the southwest that is generally west of the Lake Clark National Park and Preserve. So if you're going to be in any of these areas and are considering fire outside there, be exceedingly careful and better yet, avoid that. But looking at the satellite imagery, we do have a number of different features. That wave that's kind of been riding underneath a stronger area of high pressure that's been over central Alaska, northwest Canada. That moisture is working its way westward now into southwest parts of the state, but it has touched off some isolated thunderstorms, northern Talkeetna Mountains, and also in the vicinity just east of Fairbanks. And we do expect that as that moisture works its way in through the southwest part of the state, we'll see some scattered showers and perhaps an isolated storm pop-up in parts of the southwest, if not this evening, again during the day on Thursday with the daytime heating. And then there are a few areas of low pressure from the Gulf of Alaska back into the North Pacific that continue and influence weather there. And along the Arctic coast, we've had still some areas of fog, mainly out over the broken sea ice that remains there off the Arctic and northwest Arctic coast. But otherwise, it's been rather warm across the east central interior, with Fort Yukon seeing readings again above 80 degrees today. And that trend will likely continue for that part of Alaska, at least through the day Thursday. And taking a look at you can see kind of that enhanced cloud cover working its way westward, now approaching Bethel and Dillingham. So here's the weather map this afternoon. Weak low pressure along the Yukon Valley. It's thermal low that we get this time of year set up. Very weak, what we call dirty ridge of high pressure from the Kenai, Prince William Sound, all the way down along the southeast Panhandle coastline into British Columbia and Vancouver. The cloud cover and light precipitation still associated with that wave is working its way westward. Later tonight, early Thursday morning, we'll continue to see that ridge in place, maybe lift inland just a tad. Should allow at least the southeast Panhandle to have a drier night. And off toward the interior, still that trough of low pressure in place with some areas of fog along the Arctic coast as well as the west coast. And going into Thursday afternoon, we will see scattered showers and isolated thunderstorms redevelop from the lower Yukon and Kuskokwim river basins all the way on up into east central parts of the state and along the Talkeetna Mountains and Alaska Range. Extending down along the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians, there'll still be a potential for a few pockets of drizzle or sprinkles. And then Friday, we'll see low pressure remaining there, primarily just south of the Alaska, Gulf of Alaska there in the North Pacific, with weak low pressure from the northwest interior down through along the Canadian-Alaskan border. And with it, scattered showers and isolated storms still possible, though there should be a little more broken cloud cover in areas in and around Anchorage and maybe off toward the west a bit. And temperatures, low temperatures, we are looking for lows generally in the mid-upper 40s across the southeast as well as south central areas. And then as we go into the day on Thursday, highs should reach about 66 at Juneau, 67 at Haines. Back to the west along coastal areas, 50s along the Kenai and Kodiak Island, but about 67 at Glen Allen and maybe 64 there at McGrath. And low temperatures Friday morning will generally be in the mid 40s to around 50 degrees across the region. And temperatures on Friday should be a little bit warmer across south central areas, at least the interior, with readings back of around 70, Glen Allen, Talkeetna, and McGrath. And elsewhere, the southeast should generally be upper 50s to maybe 63 there at Haines. Otherwise, 50s to around 60 along coastal areas of Kodiak Island and the Kenai. Lows will be above freezing along the Arctic coast in the mid-upper 30s, lower 50s along the Yukon River. And high temperatures Thursday could still reach 82 at Fort Yukon, though Fairbanks will slip to 68. And readings generally in the 70s through as we travel down the Yukon River, though cooling toward the lower Yukon Delta areas, and 40s along the west coast. And then low temperatures Friday morning will stay mid-30ish along the Arctic coast, still around or a bit above 50 across the Yukon Valley. And then temperatures will still be in the 70s along the Yukon River, Galena, northeastward up through Fort Yukon. And highs getting up into the 40s along the immediate Arctic coast, 50s, 60s, isolated 70s, even in parts of the North Slope. Across the southwest, low temperatures in the interior will generally be around or a bit above 50 degrees, but extending out across the Alaska Peninsula and into the Aleutians. Lows will generally be low to mid 40s. High temperatures Thursday afternoon will generally be in the 60s with a bit more cloud cover, some scattered showers, perhaps a few isolated thunderstorms across the southwest, especially in through the interior. And then Friday morning lows across much of the region will generally be in the 40s with a few spots along the Yukon and Kuskokwim rivers near 50 degrees. And then high temperatures Friday afternoon. We're looking at highs that'll be back up around 70 as we start working our way up the Yukon and Kuskokwim rivers, with general readings in the 60s for the interior, 50s across the Alaska Peninsula, extending out before cooling into the upper 40s along the Aleutian chain. And speaking of the climate outlook, this is the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook for June 22nd through the 26th. And temperatures are expected to average above normal across the northern half of the state for a couple of reasons. One, it's been dry there, and the way the weather systems are going to be working, there's still going to be probably a weak ridge of high pressure reside there, so they'll see more sunshine. So yes, the fire danger will continue to increase there along and south of the Brooks Range. And then looking at precipitation, this could be a little more interesting. The southeast, for a change, is going to dry out. The other day, June 15th, Juneau set a record rainfall total for the date of 1.46 inches. They're going to have a chance to have some drier weather here middle of next week, whereas the southwest, including the Kenai up into south central, could see above normal precipitation because there's some of our models are indicating there could be more of a southerly flow set up there up through Cook Inlet and off of the Kodiak Island in the Kenai, which would lead to more substantial rains. We'll see if that happens, but if all that were to pass, that would start as early as Tuesday in the southwest Alaska, spreading up into south central areas for Wednesday. So keep that in mind if you have any plans next week.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
In our aviation weather for today, if you are planning a flight to close out the week, Thursday into Friday, we continue to see a big area of high pressure in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere over the northern two-thirds of the state into northwest Canada, creating a lot of VFR conditions across the interior. And then areas of IFR, MVFR across south central areas as there's been a wave kind of undercut that ridge, working its way westward with it, some lower cloud cover ceilings along with some scattered showers, even some isolated thunder potential as we head into Thursday afternoon in parts of the southwest. Otherwise, we'll continue to see IFR conditions there, parts of the Gulf along Kodiak Island, back along the west coast into the Bering Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula and to the north up along the Chukchi Sea and the Arctic Ocean. And Friday morning, a lot of VFR conditions across much of the state, especially most of the interior, with IFR conditions continuing over the water there, the Arctic North, as well as in through the Bering and the Pacific and parts of the Gulf. And then finally, Friday afternoon, still seeing the influence of that high, though it'll begin to break down here as we head into the weekend. So we'll expect widespread VFR conditions across much of the state, especially the interior, with IFR confined to areas off the coastlines, over the water, or especially out through the western half of the Aleutian chain. Past conditions on Thursday. Anaktuvuk as well as Atigun will enjoy VFR conditions. Dropping farther south, though, that wave that is kind of undercutting the ridge and working westward still keeps some moisture around. In the morning hours, IFR, Lake Clark, and Merrill improving to MVFR as we go into the afternoon. Same thing, Rainy Pass, IFR becoming MVFR as we go through the midday and afternoon. Windy Pass should see IFR conditions early in the morning becoming MVFR. And Isabel also IFR to start, but becoming VFR, and certainly the farther north you fly, the more VFR conditions you are going to run into. Metasta, same thing, MVFR becoming VFR with VFR conditions, especially north entrance, flying northward. Heading southwestward to Tanita, IFR becoming VFR later morning, afternoon. Portage will start out IFR conditions, but should improve to VFR as we go through the late morning and afternoon. And Chilkoot and White there in the northern part of the southeast peninsula. Just a little bit of IFR there early in the morning, otherwise improving to VFR as we go through the morning and afternoon. Freezing levels Thursday morning are generally around or above 8,000 feet across the north two-thirds of the state. Areas of the south central coast around or a bit below 6,000 feet, and then bumping back up to 8,000 feet there in through the eastern Aleutians. Potential for icing will exist generally between 10 and 15,000 feet over parts of the south central and southwest peninsula, including Kodiak Island, east side of the Kenai, and then also in the southeast around Haida Gwaii, and then back through the west above 10,000 feet in the western Bering. I'll look at jet stream level winds. We have light winds across the state, the interior, though, from the south upwards to 50 knots, south central areas, and northeast to 60 knots across the beginning of the southwest peninsula, Alaska Peninsula there, around Dillingham, King Salmon, and then northwest winds on the backside of that low pressure circulation upwards to 60 knots at the tip of the southwest peninsula. Mid-levels clearly show this high pressure in control from the Seward Peninsula through the northeast up along the Yukon River and back into northwest Canada, with some winds up from the southwest there in the Bering Strait, 35 to near 40 knots, and then also an area there coming in through the eastern half of the Aleutians from the southeast around 30 to 40 knots, and bringing it down to the 3,000 foot level. There is a weak low pressure circulation there kind of between the North Pacific and Gulf of Alaska, bringing onshore winds from the east of 35 knots there off of Kodiak Island, and a little snaking southwest winds of 30 knots just on the west side of the Alaska Range through the Kuskokwim River Basin. And then finally back out along the tip of the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern half of the Aleutians, southeast winds of 35 to 40 knots. Quick check of turbulence, surface to 4,000 feet around Point Hope up there in the northwest. Surface to 10,000 feet along the Alaska Range, particularly in the morning. Surface to 6,000 feet in parts of the southeast and around Kodiak Island. And surface to 4,000 feet turbulence possible, the tip of the Alaska Peninsula on out into the eastern Aleutians. Fly safely if you're heading out.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder. As you well know, you can get forecast information for any day of the week. Today, tonight, tomorrow, out to 6 or 7 days. It includes the high and low temperature, the wind direction, the chance of rain or snow in your part of Alaska. But did you know that there is information available to forecast out to 2 weeks? So the question is, how would you use that information? And here to answer that question today and tell us a lot more about climate services from the U.S. National Weather Service Alaska region is Rick Toman. He's the program manager for the Climate Science and Services. And Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
How would we use information that is out to 2 weeks instead of just the high and low and the chance of rain?
Well, Dave, as we move out in time, of course, forecasts become more uncertain. So as we move into that second week from now, we're not looking at specific highs or lows or precipitation amounts at any given place, what we can do with the state of the science at this point is get a handle on patterns. So we can say things like increased chances for stormy weather in the Bering Sea in 2 weeks, or we've been in a cold weather pattern, looks like 8 to 10 days from now, that pattern's going to change. Those are the kind of forecasts that we can currently make in that second week.
So you're increasing lead time for perhaps big or small weather events and telling us the likelihood of maybe more coastal storms or wind events in some areas?
Those are the kinds of things that that we hope to be able to let Alaskans know in the second week forecast. And if you have an activity or an event that you would find that kind of advance notice useful, whether it's moving stuff off of the beach, whether to go out hunting or to come back from camp, those kind of decisions, the week 2 provides the opportunity for you to get a handle on that kind of information.
Okay. What other type of weather impacts that we're familiar with might Alaskans use climate services for?
Well, in the forecast realm, we can go provide some information from this week 2, say the 8 to 14 day period, on out to the monthly and even seasonal time scale. Now, those monthly seasonal forecasts are still kind of just really very much pattern dependent, and the amount of detail that we can provide at this point is still pretty limited. Generally, indications of how temperature and precipitation will fall in maybe above normal, below normal kind of range. But in the week 2 period, we can be considerably more specific than that as far as the general patterns and really the impacts on Alaskans.
Okay, so we would be talking about generalizations there that would tell us that the period might be more stormy, might be more hot, more dry, more cold, and situations like that.
That's correct. So we're not going to be able to say in which community, for instance, there's the threat of coastal flooding, but we can often be able to tell we're moving into a pattern that would be conducive to big Bering Sea storms. So if you're in an area that could potentially impact you, you'll want to pay attention to the weather forecast.
Okay. Now, every day and every hour of the day, the National Weather Service is working on a forecast for the next day. But how do you start your forecast process for that extended period that goes out beyond 7 days?
Well, the way things work right now, we start off with the expected general flow pattern for Alaska and the whole world, really, and then we narrow that down to Alaska. So we start off with the basic computer model forecast. There's quite a few different computer models that we look at, bring those together. And then another important part of that is we attempt to assess the confidence. The reality is often 2 weeks away, the computer models are very divergent. They have lots of different solutions, and that's an indication that we don't have much confidence. But when we see more agreement in that time frame, and when that agreement is a pattern that will be potentially very impactful for Alaska or is a big change from what we've been in, that's when we can then take that expected pattern. We have computer models forecasting it. We've assessed the confidence. Now we can move that forward. How, using our experience as Alaskan weather forecasters, how does that typically play out for Alaska? So is this a stormy pattern for the Bering Sea? Is this an extra rainy period for Southeast? Is this the kind of pattern that generates strong winds potentially in the Anchorage Bowl? Is this a deep cold pattern for the interior? All of those are the kind of things that we're looking at in these large-scale patterns. That's very different than telling you that the winds on 10 days from now are going to be gusting to 120 on the hillside. We're looking for patterns, not the very specific information that the Weather Service will then hone in on as the event gets closer.
So the idea is to keep the 5, 6, 7 day forecast the same, where you are getting the standard high and low temperature and the chance of wind or rain, but further out you get a broad general forecast, but as the time gets closer to that event, we'll get a lot more specific.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. So how can people use this information if I am out in the bush and I want to see, is a coastal storm expected in my region, or is a chance for that improving over the next 2 to 3 weeks? Where could I go to get information like that?
when we see that potentially impactful or a big change in the weather is coming 8 to 14 days out, typically we will start to highlight that on the Weather Service Facebook site. We might produce a YouTube video highlighting that, linking that on our Facebook site. So often at this point, we don't have much to say in that because we're really looking for those forecasts of opportunities. But one thing we can say very likely as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be more and more of this kind of forecast information available in that week 2 time frame.
Okay, and something that emergency managers and city planners and folks in villages might be interested in keeping an eye out for, looking for that information to be headlined, whether that's on social media or perhaps through the National Weather Service channels there to get information from you to make better plans a little bit longer term and make better preparations in the event that things become a little bit more unsettled.
Absolutely. Climate Services with the National Weather Service Alaska region is talking to the state of Alaska every week, apprising them of that 2-week outlook. And on the social media side, we are working to keep Alaskans informed so that when we think we have some confidence in a high impact or a big change, that's the best way right now for folks to find out about that. Twitter, Facebook, so stay tuned to your National Weather Service.
Very good, a developing program. Rick Toman with the National Weather Service Alaska region. He's a Climate Science and Services Program Manager. Thanks so much for joining us again, Rick, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Great, thanks Dave.
For another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Well, we start our marine weather segment with the sea ice edge, and as we've been speaking here, the water has really opened up around the Bering Strait up into the Chukchi Sea. Still some areas of ice lingering there between the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island. But otherwise, progress continues with the ice breaking up along the northwest and Arctic coasts. And as we'd expect, we're just days away now from the summer solstice of the Northern Hemisphere, which occurs this Sunday at 7:32 p.m. Alaska Daylight Time. The marine forecast for Thursday, the southeast panhandle, inner waterways, look for southeast winds 5 to 10 knots, waves generally a foot or two. Along the Gulf Coast areas, winds will be out of the southeast 15 to 20 knots, 8-foot swells, Gustavus down to Craig. But once you get Yakutat westward to Cape St. Elias out of the east at 15 to 20 knots, 7-footers. And then on Friday, southeast winds between 5 and 50 knots, the inner waterways, waves 2 to maybe 3 feet up as you get into Lynn Canal. Otherwise, along the Gulf Coast, winds will generally be out of the southeast about 15 knots and swells right around 6 feet. Across south central areas out over the Gulf, open waters, winds are going to be out of the east-northeast at 25 knots, swells 5 to 6 feet. Prince William Sound, northeast 10 knots, 2-footers. And then along Cook Inlet, winds will be somewhat variable, though more out of the northeast at 10 knots, though the mouth could see easterly winds up to 20 knots, 6-foot swells. And then for Friday, look for generally easterly winds across the northern Gulf of Alaska, 15 to 20 knots, swells 5 to 6 feet. Prince William Sound, easterly winds 10 knots, 2-footers, and across Cook Inlet, winds will generally be out of the northeast 10 to 15 knots, and waves running 2 or 3 feet. Now for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island on Thursday, winds will be out of the northeast 20-25 knots around Kodiak Island, 6 to 7-foot swells and up to 8 feet on the Pacific side. Out of the east, 10 to 20 knots, waves 1 to 3 feet on the Bering side. And then for Friday, winds will still be out of the east-northeast on the Pacific and Gulf sides at around 20 to 25 knots, swells upwards to 6 feet. Whereas on the Bering side, east-northeast winds around 15 knots and swells 2 to 3 feet. Across the Aleutian chain, the eastern Aleutians will see east-northeast winds around 25 knots, swells 6 to 7 feet either side, and out west of Adak, north winds 20 to 25 knots and waves around 5 feet. For Friday, winds will be northeasterly across most of the Aleutian chain, 20 to 25 knots, swells 6 feet or so on the Bering side, 9 to 10 feet. On the Pacific side, especially south of Nikolsky, but west of Adak, winds will be a little bit going more toward the east-southeast there around Kiska, with swells around 5 feet. Now, the west coast, we're going to see offshore flow out of the northeast around 10 to 15 knots, and generally easterly flow 10 to 15 knots over the open waters with waves of 2 to 4 feet. For Friday, still look for northeasterly winds of 15 knots or so, offshore flow from the mainland, waves 3 to 4 feet in most cases. And then up along the Arctic coast, winds will be out of the generally east at 15 to 20 knots. But along the northwest coast and off of the Seward Peninsula, south winds 15 knots and waves upwards to 3 to 5 feet, especially in the open waters there, the Bering Strait on up into the lower Chukchi Sea. And then for Friday, along the Arctic coast, winds will be out of the east-southeast 10 to 15 knots. Still areas of ice where there is open water, perhaps 1 to 3 foot waves. And then generally south winds off of the northwest coast, especially Kotzebue Sound northward at 10 to 15 knots, and waves 3 or 4 feet. Quick check of the surface weather charts. We have one low pressure out kind of just there southwest of the Gulf of Alaska, another one south of the central Aleutians in the North Pacific. Still some areas of fog along the Arctic coast as well as around the Bering Strait. Weak high pressure in place there around St. Lawrence. And then on Friday, still areas of patchy fog along the Arctic coast there and in through parts of the lower Chukchi Sea with a low pressure system, and weak front lifting up through the North Pacific and lower Gulf of Alaska. So that's our show for this Wednesday evening. Thank you for joining us, and we certainly look forward to seeing you again come tomorrow night. As always, you can always go to weather.gov/.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.